And so, good morning. I'm smiling because I have a question here. When do we declare? No, that is the one. Excuse me. Does a person such as yourself ever have any physical discords or inharmonious relations with other people? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. At one time, and this was when Mrs. Eddy was about way up in the late 80s, 87 I believe, and had built a worldwide organization on her spiritual development, suit was brought against her by a magazine in New York using her son, Mrs. Eddy's own son, as a stooge to have her declared mentally incompetent. She had had the ability to make about $8 million, but Munsey's magazine decided that she didn't have the ability to take care of it after she got it, and they would be a better agency for it. So they decided to have her declared mentally incompetent, and they used her son as an instrument to bring this suit. And she was asked the question, how is it, with your wonderful understanding, with all of this wonderful Christ consciousness you have, how is it that a thing like this could happen to you? And her answer was, this is my penalty for having been married. In Science and Health, she writes that Jesus would never have been crucified if he had never taken a student to teach. And that is between those two statements you have the absolute truth. An individual, as they come into a measure of spiritual awareness, would never have a problem. Having found their oneness and their ability to demonstrate the 15th chapter of John, their oneness through the vine with the Godhead, there could be no such thing as a problem into their experience. But in our present state of development, we insist on either marrying or having children or having close friends and pals or taking students, and in that measure do we have some of their problems to work out. Because if a person has a wife or a husband not at that same, or a child, not at that same level of consciousness, there's no way you can bring them there or make them there, and therefore you either have to leave them, desert them, or suffer it to be so now, work with them until they do grow. And so you are having a problem that is not your problem except by virtue of your relationship with another. And so it is with students. You work with students, and in some measure you are always taking on a burden of their development. We have had that experience even in this work. Mrs. Eddy had more of it, and I suppose Mrs. Fillmore too, or any other person who has conducted a work of this nature, that you find a teacher, you find a student, and the first thing you know, you watch them develop and in turn become practitioner or teacher. And if their consciousness isn't at the full level, what happens? If they go through a period of lack or limitation, they get fearful, or they feel it's a lack of demonstration and get ashamed of it. And the first thing you know, they're either coming back upon the teacher, or they're resorting to human means to solve their problem of supply. And all of this brings back a trouble upon the teacher. Or they may prosper too greatly to begin with. And if they do, it can go to their head and they begin to indulge their prosperity. whatever happens to that teacher is a reflection upon their teacher. Whatever happens to a practitioner is in a measure a reflection, and their teacher in the last analysis is called upon to help them out. And then we have the experience too. I've written a letter on that subject years ago, that lonesomeness comes in, and sex attraction comes in, and all of these things come into this work, and then the teacher has to get the student out. And in that measure, then, a teacher has a problem of human relations, of family relations, of student and teacher relations, and one thing and another of that kind. And that only, remember, is after a person has themselves worked out of all that. Never think for a moment that in the coming up of this work, that everyone that we know of, has had problems of economics, problems of finances, problems of lonesomeness, problems of companionship, problems of every nature, and each one has to work out of those before they come into the fullness of the consciousness. You say, is it necessary? No, it isn't necessary, but neither do we know anyone who hasn't had it who's amounted to anything. There are loads of nice, sweet little people who have never worked out of these problems, but neither have they worked up to any great heights. Those who have gone to the highest points have worked out through the severest demonstrations, and there's a very good reason for it. Any degree of satisfaction or contentment in material good will ultimately lead one into trouble. And so if a person has a good income or good health and is in any wise relying on it, they will not make their spiritual demonstration until they have demonstrated above good health and good supply, demonstrated above the sense of good material resources, and find themselves drawing completely from the Spirit. So these inharmonies occur, and how they are overcome, that of course is an individual thing. They are never overcome twice the same way, and one has to go to God for guidance at every step in order to have these worked out, since in some cases they're worked out by separation, divorce, separation from the student or teacher, divorce from the student or teacher, complete severance of relations. At other times they're worked out through a complete understanding taking place in the wiping out of whatever the reason for the discord was. Who is to say how? And the next question, when we declare that God is power, presence, cause, law, is this not argument? Can be, yes, surely. But there's nothing wrong with argument. It is a step in our unfoldment, and the argument that comes down to the declaration that God is power, presence, cause is not quite so much argument as it is declaration, affirmation, or reminder, restatement of truth. And so, even if it is argument, it is desirable as a step to lead us up to a state of consciousness in which we can be receptive. Now, probably whoever wrote this question did not hear me say that we do not claim this to be an absolute teaching. At no time do I declare or write that the infinite way is an absolute teaching, and I have stated over and over and over again that it is my hope that our students will never declare it to be an absolute teaching. It is absolute truth, but it is not an absolute teaching. What is the difference? Well, the absolute truth is the revelation of the allness of God, the nature of error as non-existence, as an unreal concept, and of course the rising into the absolute consciousness of God being. But you see, the teaching can't be absolute because it provides all the human footsteps for lifting ourselves up into that absolute consciousness. Now, the teaching itself, the message itself, is one of absolute truth. That is, the revelation of God consciousness as the only real consciousness, and the need to demonstrate that, to arrive at that state of consciousness. But we provide every single footstep ever known in the form of meditation, treatment, argument, reminders of truth, reading of Scripture, reading of our writings, tape recordings, class instruction, lectures, articles in magazines and newspapers. Well, you see, God would know nothing of that. And to be absolute, you'd have to leave all of that out and do as ultimately we will do. Just meet together like this and sit quietly and peacefully, and then once in a while an idea will unfold and it'll be voiced, and at the end of an hour or two we'll all get up and go home. That will be when even the teaching itself is on an absolute plane. There will be no attempt to teach from one to another. Be no attempt to lift up into divine consciousness. And so I say this: the message of the infinite way is absolute truth. But the teaching and the mode or means of arriving at that state of consciousness embodies all of the human help that we know. Also, the word absolute in the metaphysical world has two different connotations, neither of which apply to the message of the infinite way. There is a metaphysical teaching called absolute, which says that God is all. And therefore, of course, there is no man, and there is no universe, and there are no birds, no animals. There's nothing but God. And that teaching does not apply to the message of the infinite way. And then there is another absolute teaching that involves a continuous affirmation of statements of truth to bring about the healing. And believe me, it is composed of argument and argument and argument and argument, never settling down into a realization of that heavenly peace. And that also has the title absolute teaching. I don't quarrel with either of those or with the use of the word absolute. I merely state that neither of those absolute teachings have anything in common with the message of the infinite way. And therefore, the use of the term absolute teaching to the infinite way would be incorrect. Is that clear? Would you care to discuss a little more in detail the marked paragraph on the attached page of The Master Speaks? And that paragraph has to do with a statement that, I'll quote it. I only know this, that somewhere about 1924 the world passed from a very mental and mechanical state of consciousness into the beginning of a spiritual movement, a movement which ultimately is going to encompass the entire world. In other words, we are coming into a spiritual age. And yes, I'll be happy to tell you that from the time of Mesmer's discovery of mental power, the world progressed from that raw, rough beginning up into the refinements of mental approach to life, God, and truth through Christian Science, unity, and New Thought, so forth. and all of this on a mental plane, leading, however, to higher spiritual realization. At the same time, the world made a greater advance in the mechanical development of human existence. Probably in 100 years it made more progress than in the previous 7,000 years. And this also is mental. Everything that is done in the realm of mechanics is done through the mind. And without the mind there would be no mechanics. And so this also is part of our mental age. It's called the age of gadgets and gimmicks, but actually it is a mental age appearing as mechanical progress. Now, why I said 1924 is that somewhere about 1933 in meditation, that statement was given to me within, that in 1924 we passed from the mental and mechanical age into the beginning of the unfoldment of the spiritual age, and that from that time forward there has been less of mental argument, mental treatment, and the beginning of spiritual treatment or spiritual unfoldment and spiritual wisdom. Well, of course, events since then prove that that is true. The more mental of the mental sciences have certainly dropped far and far away. And as the psychology developed and psychiatry and came to its maximum, we also find that, especially noticeable now, the decline in both psychology and psychiatry. In fact, I have heard physicians say within this last year that they hope someday to have psychiatry outlawed by an act of Congress, that it's proven to be the most dangerous form of curative art ever discovered, and causing far more disease than it has ever been known to cure. And I'll make this as a prediction that someday the psychologists will very voluntarily give up the things that is causing so much harm in their practice and in the practice of psychology throughout the world. It is being given up by the law of supply and demand. The publisher, the largest publisher of literature on psychology, the head of the firm told me himself that the demand for how-to books has now to be pushed. It isn't a natural one. How to succeed and how to get rich quick and how to get healthy in a hurry and how to make friends and how to do this and how to do that. But the demand is now at the place where that type of literature has to be promoted rather than go out on its own momentum. And of course we have been witnessing this past year the amount of people out on the lecture platform unable to complete even their week's engagement with such programs. No, it is evident that the mental age is going out and the spiritual age is coming in. And some of the signs of the incoming of the spiritual age became evident when books such as Perennial Philosophy and Men Who Have Walked with God and Cosmic Consciousness and Gibran and all the rest of these pointing more to the spiritual and mystical have become bestsellers, something that perhaps a generation ago could not have taken place. And so it is that all of these, let's even call them philosophies, but tending toward the spiritual side, are in the ascendancy. Those on the mental side are going out. on this trip, many of the men connected with metaphysical centers came to me and expressed the same thought of the falling away of audiences, falling away of classes in the mental forms of approach. I would not even like to discuss those more than to say that it really happened, and that there are evidences that wherever a spiritual teaching is given, you are attracting more and more people, and that the mental approaches are having more and more difficulty in maintaining themselves. That is self-evident as you look around the world. When President Eisenhower was inaugurated, I think it was only a couple of days after that he attended a breakfast, a prayer breakfast, and helped to inaugurate a regular program of prayer breakfast at which prominent men in the government meet for a few moments of prayer. There was nothing mental about their prayers. They are prayers addressed to their highest concept of God. And it's a strange thing. It really doesn't matter what one's concept of God is if the desire is to reach God. The mere fact that one may picture God as a man on a cross or a man walking in Galilee, or that one may picture God in their thought as an old gentleman with a white beard, or that one may picture God in any other way or without picturing God, regardless of one's concept, one will reach God if the desire is to reach God. But turning the name God into divine mind or divine love or divine soul or anything else, and calling oneself a metaphysician will not lead to God. The mere changing of a name or concept of God does not govern one's ability to approach God or to reach God or find God. The experience of God is one of grace, entirely one of grace. And it comes to those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, after God, after spirit, after love. And it makes no difference in what church one may be, a member or an attendant. It makes no difference whether one has never been in a church and never expects to be in church. What counts is the desire in the heart, the depth and the degree of it, and the willingness to know God without qualification. Not let me be healed and I'll search for God. Not let me demonstrate enough supply to pay my bills and then I will search for God. No. If necessary, let me sit down on a park bench with a crust of bread and find God. If necessary, let me go through the torments of sin or disease and find God. Not make the finding of God secondary to some more pleasant human experience first. No, God, whether our Orthodox friends seek God as the God of their church, or whether we seek God as divine mind or divine principle or universal life, is of relatively little importance. The important thing is that God be the paramount idea of our experience, of our life. Then when that comes, the experience of God comes through grace. It is true that when it comes to the spiritual healing work, before the attainment of the realization of God, that the letter of truth, and more especially the correct letter of truth, is important, since we build that consciousness of truth on the correct letter. But never believe that that is the only method of approaching God, because that would deprive our ancient friends who had not the benefit of metaphysics from the experience of God. And I doubt that we have any right to do that with so much evidence of men who not only were God-hungry, but who were God-filled. God-filled men. There have been God-filled men and God-filled women of all ages. And the reading of some of the manuscripts and letters that they've left behind indicate very clearly that very few of them had a metaphysical concept of life. But they did have the companionship and the divine blessing of the experience of God. Now in this age, all of these people who are meeting to have prayer, breakfasts, and so forth, not those who go to church to pray for peace. I'm not speaking of those. I'm not speaking of those who go to church to pray for supply or for help. I'm speaking now of people who pray such prayers as President Eisenhower prayed. Fill us, guide us, lead us, direct us, be with us in our undertaking. Such prayers. Not seeking good in the human sense of the word, but seeking divine direction, that the spiritual sense of good may be interpreted on the human plane. Quite a difference, quite a distinction. One is a seeking of the thing with God's help, and the other is seeking God that the thing may take place. And that distinction is enough to separate one from divine grace if one is on the wrong side of it. When in past ages have we ever known large corporations and large trade unions to turn and send to an individual for prayers to settle their differences? But it is happening now. It is happening in this age. When did we have politicians or statesmen turn seriously and ask for spiritual guidance in their campaigns or in their fulfilling of their offices? Oh, we have had outstanding examples, such as Lincoln saying, not is God on my side, but am I on God's side? Yes, we have had individuals, but think now how that has been multiplied to where people in every walk of life, all stations of life, are turning seriously to an idea of God. Now, this isn't always clear, because unfortunately, in this mental and psychological approach, they still fear to use the word God. They still believe that the world doesn't want to hear the word God or prayer. You'd be surprised how many of them will tell you. I was told several times on this last trip. Of course, we're rewriting books now to leave out the word God and prayer, because people resent them. I could show you a few of the articles that have been written recently that never had the word God or prayer in them, and they were religious articles by religious people. That is, people of religious following. But that isn't true. There is no such condition in the world. The word God and the word prayer, these are not in disrepute. The word God or the word prayer, as it has been presented, is not too highly respected, But when the Word God is explained, interpreted, when the Word God is presented in a truer sense, then you find nothing more welcome than the Word God, and next to it, the word prayer. On my trip around this country, and it covered everything from California to New York and back, I had not one single person in our audiences tell me that they resented my use of the word God or prayer. On the contrary, the amount of people who came to me and said, I love the way you pound away at that word God, as if you really meant it. And I do, you know that. I really do. Because God is the magical word. God is the word of magic. But God must be understood. The nature of God must be understood so that we lose these old connotations and stop this, oh God, save my child. Oh God, send me bread. When we lose that sense of God and come into an awareness of the nature of God as love, as law, as infinite love and infinite law, oh, what a different world opens up. What a different God appears. What a different sense prayer takes on. I love that thing on prayer, the holy hush of prayer. It is a holy hush. Words fall away. It's a strange thing. We can, in classes, talk and talk and talk and talk about this, but you know that outside of classes you can't do it. There's just nothing to say. It's something you feel, and you never want to talk to anyone about it. You never want to discuss it with anyone unless you meet a person here or there as hungry as you are. And then you can sit for hours and hours and hours, and the word God and the word prayer, they flow and flow and flow. But otherwise, to me, it seems almost sacrilegious to talk about God, talk about prayer to those who have no concept or idea of it. Now we have the question, would you please explain the unreality of death and life eternal? I'd love to. Nothing I love more than the subject of life eternal and the subject of death. Except it is that word God and prayer, those words, God and prayer. If you look out onto this world, the subject of death is very easy. Everyone who is born must die. Everything that is born must die. Everything that has a beginning must have an ending. How do we know that? By the evidence of our senses. Same way we know the tracks come together in the distance. Same way we know that the sky sits on a mountain. Same way that we know there's water on a dry desert. That's how we know that everything that lives must die. Through the same senses that delude us, through the same senses that fool us in every way, the same senses that make us trust, put our faith in princes, that make us consider man whose breath is in his nostril. Those five physical senses testify to a beginning and to an ending. They testify to birth and to death. And if you can believe them in one way, you might as well make up your mind to believe them in all ways. As you live long enough to get a few gray hairs, you will find out that you can't believe those five physical senses. And so the idea now comes, how then do you approach the subject of life and the understanding of death? And the answer is this. You begin with the word God. And since the letters G-O-D in and of themselves will not give you the unfoldment, you turn to one of the synonyms of God that meet the situation, and you find that a synonym for God, much used, is that of life. God is life. Now, when does God begin? And when does God end? And there you have the story of life eternal. Since God is life, life has no beginning, and life has no ending. And where in that entire word of life would you find death? Where in the entire understanding of God as immortality could you find mortal life? Are you following that? Do you see that point? If God is life, if God is immortal, is life mortal? No. Or on the other hand, is there more than one life? Since we've accepted God as life and God as immortality and God as infinity. Now, if God is infinite life, is there a life beside that? No. All right. God then being life and God being infinite life, there can be no life that has beginning or ending. Now we come to the point of realization in our individual experience. Why were we born and why will we die? Because of the acceptance of a life other than God. That's all, as simple as that. Declare, realize that God is our only life, and you've dropped all possibility of dying. We've even dropped the possibility of old age, weakness. All of the discord of human experience may be summed up in this: a sense of separation from God. I don't care whether it's financial lack, moral lack, physical lack, mental lack. It is summed up in a sense of separation from God. The understanding of God as one's life reveals immortality, eternality, infinity. In the same way that any sense of mental weakness, loss of memory, loss of sanity, loss of intelligence, all based on what? A mind apart from God, a sense of separation from the God mind. Now, if you accept God as mind, you accept only one mind. And that mind, individual mind. That's all. And it's as simple as that. If God is mind, intelligence is infinite. Whose intelligence? The intelligence of that mind, which is the mind of the individual. Now, you can take 20 synonyms, go up and down the ladder: soul, spirit, substance, activity. And you'll find the same thing, that if you can come first of all to the agreement within yourself that there's only one, and that one is God, then that one becomes that life, mind, soul, spirit being of the individual, and it becomes perfect. Now, the same rule applies in working out human relationships, and anyone can work out at least 90% or more of harmonious human relationships in the understanding of God as the life, mind, soul, spirit of every individual we meet. Every individual we meet. I had a beautiful letter yesterday from the Middle West, from a school teacher, telling me of the wonderful change in the classroom since accepting this idea that the students did not have minds of their own with psychological backgrounds and different homes and different families and different environment and different circumstances. Instead of treating them that way, this teacher had begun to treat them as the one mind. And it was really a beautiful letter of a complete change of events in that room. And so it is with us in business, in this work, in any work, the realization that there's only one mind we're dealing with, not people with different backgrounds, not people with different environments. That is very noticeable. It was more noticeable some years ago than now, but we still have it to a limited extent. When our classes first began, the first night of class was always a torture. There were always some Christian Scientists over here and some Unity students here and some New Thought students here, and all sitting with mental walls up there, wondering what I was going to say and whether I was going to throw brickbats at Mrs. Eddy or Mrs. Fillmore or Mr. Dr. Holmes, and they were all ready for me if I did. And here I was sitting trying to share a little tale about God that I've learned. And usually the second night that calmed down. By the third night we had a very peaceful class, and by the fourth night we really were all of one mind. Now we have been able to eliminate those first 4 nights because that doesn't happen. The only thing that happens now is about the first 10 minutes of the first night there is a little adjustment until we get on each other's beam. And after that we really are a family of good friends. Well, it becomes necessary constantly to realize that there aren't people sitting out here with different backgrounds, different thoughts, different beliefs, different faiths, that as a matter of fact, there isn't even a person up here with a conviction. All there is a group of people here in and of the one mind. There's only one mind appearing here as, and we are all listening to that one mind. We are all receiving from that one mind. And those of you who have been in this work several years and have watched Love and Gratitude and the 23rd Psalm and Consciousness Unfolding or Master Speaks come forth certainly can know that I was hearing the same thing you were hearing at the same time. Certainly you know that none of that was made up before I came in and sat on the platform, on the chair here. You've witnessed that too many times, and you know that all of those things, why we wouldn't have these in manuscript form if it wasn't for these machines that take it as it comes out. No, we are all here for one purpose, and that is to come together in and of God. But I'm here for that same purpose. I'm not here to tell you something I learned yesterday, only to be the mouthpiece for whatever it is that unfolds today. And in most cases, I'm learning it at the same moment you are. Now that is the way to arrive at harmony in business and with one's associates. Begin with the understanding not of a separate selfhood, but of one selfhood infinitely manifested. And so you'll find that there is one way to eliminate death. And that way is to come to the realization that only God is life. And that life is the life of individual beings. Do not declare or believe that God is the only life and therefore I'm not living. I resent it. Yes, I am life eternal, but that I that declares it as Joel or as Bill or Mary or whatever your name may be. And so we are not wiping ourselves out. What we are doing is perpetuating our identity. However, even the identity of Joel wishes to progress year by year by year. It will still be Joel 1,000 years from now, but it will look out from a higher unfoldment just as it looks out now from a higher unfoldment than 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But it is Joel, and it is Joel of 50 years ago. No, it was only 40, excuse me. You follow that? Never wipe out individuality or identity. Let God be your individuality. Let God be your identity. But be individual. Since God does not repeat itself even in fingerprints, so God does not repeat itself in your abilities or mine. That's why there is no such thing as competition. There's no such thing as competition. There's no such thing as too many truth teachers or too many truth centers. Why, there never has been a city that even had 1% enough of them, even to meet the demand. And there never will be. As long as an individual knows that God is appearing to them as individual integrity, individual presentation, individual harmony. Now, let us understand this. To every one of us comes a period or point of transition. If we live our daily lives minute by minute, in whatever way it is presented to us, maintaining always the realization of God as individual being, we will continue to unfold and unfold, always reaching higher levels of consciousness. And one day, we will find ourselves removed from this scene of activity, not kicked out of our body by disease, just gently moved on in a transitional experience to the next higher unfoldment. There is no provision in the divine economy for anyone walking around on the earth forever in this form. Why? Well, this form that you see is not the form that sits here. This is our concept of the divine body. But this concept of body has been changing every few years for the last 30, 40 years. This concept of body has been changing, just as this concept of life has been changing, and this concept of love has been changing, and this concept of supply has been changing, so this concept of body has been changing, and progressively. And it will continue to progress. The concept will. The body won't. The body is the temple of God. But you can't see this body except in your higher moments of meditation. When I am in my depth of meditation, more especially if I have a very difficult case and am forced to go deep, deep down within my being to bring out healing, then I catch glimpses of the spiritual life and the spiritual form. I catch glimpses even of the form behind the flower. I have always, ever since I've been in this work, caught glimpses of spiritual man, that is, spiritual identity. And the further my work goes, the more I see of the spiritual nature of this universe, not through my eyes. Through my eyes I still see men and women and trees and flowers and oceans. It's true that even what I see is much better to my eyes than it formerly was, because I see more of the good points and less of the others. The others have lost a great deal of their reality. But that is still not beholding the real. The real is beheld in the glimpse that one gets in the depth of meditation or treatment when we behold him as he is. And then we're satisfied with that likeness. And so, that body that is our real body, we will have forever. We won't leave it any place. It won't be buried. It won't be burned. Never believe that for a single moment. The only thing that we ever drop is a concept of body. And as we stepped out of our infant body and our youth body into maturity, so we step out of a mortal sense of body into the spiritual demonstration and realization of body. And that we can do, and do here on this plane. It is not necessary to die or make the transition to experience it. We have experienced it here and now. The Master says, I can lay down my life, I can pick up my life, and I will tell you that there are others who can step in or out of the mortal concept of body and life at will, here and now. And it all comes about through attaining the revelation or realization within of true being. That is the first thing. That was what Mrs. Eddy had in mind when she wrote, Jesus beheld in science the perfect man, where sick and sitting mortal man appears to mortals. She did not mean that Jesus visualized a human being in a perfectly healthy body. Never did she have such a thing in her mind. She meant what she said, that Jesus, through his spiritual wisdom, through his spiritual mind, his soul faculties, beheld man as he really is, described later by John as the temple not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Now, the whole of John is a revelation of the world invisible. The world invisible to human eyesight, not invisible. Believe me, it is a visible world, the spiritual world, but it is visible only to illumined consciousness. Our dear lady, Miss Betty, saw that also in a passage in Science and Health where she says, to what sense did this vision come to St. John? Through what sense? The visual organs for seeing, hearing? No. And then she said, he saw that which the unillumined couldn't see. Only the illumined could see. And I say that to you. The practitioner who is doing good healing work is one who has seen that which is invisible, heard that which is inaudible, and knows that which is unknowable. And that's not an impossibility, that is a fact. There comes a period in the development of every spiritual seer when they behold that which is invisible to the unillumined human mind. But to the illumined human consciousness, it is visible. Now, everyone who has approached that in spiritual healing work has, in some measure or other, caught momentary glimpses, and later can at will live in that consciousness where they behold this universe as it really is. and from that moment on can step in or step out, be here or be there. That is all within the realm of the spiritual faculties once the human consciousness is illumined to the degree of inner vision. Now, we have experiences, a few of them in modern times, one that of Bicknell Young, the other that of Brown Landon, of people who stepped out at a certain period of their experience and, to our sense, left human bodies to be buried or disposed of, but actually not to their sense. They knew what they were doing. They approached that period when they knew that their work was complete and that there was a greater work ahead, and they stepped out. To our sense, they left bodies, but they knew that they had long since outgrown mortal concepts of body, and so they didn't see them or know they had them anymore. Only the fellow out here, still looking through mortal eyes, saw mortal bodies. But they themselves had dropped them long before that period that we call transition. In the same way that practitioners sometimes get the vision of the healing of their patient while the disease is still apparent in the body. The practitioner has dropped the disease. The practitioner has dropped the diseased body. The practitioner no longer knows of such things. But the patient, to their sense, still maintains a diseased body, and it may take a day, a week, a month before they say, "Oh, I'm healed." Yes, I knew that a month ago. Now, in the same way, there are those who are above and beyond the mortal concept of body, and you can know them by their healing work. In the degree that they are enabled to see through the appearance to real being and real body, their healing works are beautiful and without prolonged time. And they can, and sometimes do, approach states and stages of consciousness where they have shed their mortal concept of body. They can't shed it for you because you are looking out through the same mortal sense with which they had formerly beheld their mortal body and yours. But in the degree that they have risen above the mortal sense of their body and yours, they are no longer bound or in bondage to that physical concept of form. And yet, it can be laid down and picked up according to the need of the moment. Well, surprising enough, I thought this was going to be something entirely different today, so we'll have to save it for tonight. But we must not go without a meditation or a treatment. You choose for yourself whether you have somebody needing help that you would like to give your treatment to, or whether you would just like to relax and have a meditation in the realization of God without any other thought entering. Those who wish to merely have the meditation, please remember to have a verse of Scripture and then hold it up here so that they can ponder it and think about it while waiting for God to reveal the next unfoldment. For those giving a treatment to someone, immediately, this minute, drop that person and their condition from your thought and turn to the Word God. And for a minute or two realize the nature of God, the nature of prayer, and then just listen, be still, Be still, listen until you get your click. You won't need that. For a little while, for some weeks, try consciously to remember every day that passage from Matthew 4 of Jesus calling the fishermen from their nets and leaving their nets and leaving their father. And as you bring that to your conscious remembrance, remember that in your particular case, it is a call to leave some form of material or human dependency, and see if you cannot gradually make that transition to loose yourself from some form of material dependence or bondage, as if you had been called to give up a reliance on some mortal or material thing, person, or circumstance, and develop that consciousness within yourself that I am following him. That is, I am relying on the Spirit, not on the form. Thank you until tonight. And